Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. I want to wish everyone happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, of course, the impending New Year, and whatever other holidays people, Kwanzaa, whatever holiday you celebrate. I think this time of year it's important to be around friends and family and feel the warmth of the season. With that said, we saw yesterday Ruby Franke enter a court of law and enter 4 guilty pleas in regards to the case against her, the 4 charges, the 4 felonies that she pled to. Seems like everyone on YouTube has been covering this case. Some surprises, I think, that they were predicting different things than what we actually predicted early on. We predicted early on that one of the 2 defendants was going to cop a plea. And we predicted it was going to be Ruby Franke, because even though she is as complicit as Jody Hildebrandt, it would seem that Jody Hildebrandt is the worst of the 2. However, it's tough in a case like this, a situation like this, to assign that title to the horrific crimes that were committed. So we're going to talk today because yesterday when we covered this case, we didn't have really the results of the allocution. In New York, when you plead guilty, you must stand in front of the court of law and orally admit to each and every part of that crime and subdivision and admit to each one. In this case, she did allocute, but in the way of writing in a sworn statement. So that wasn't known until, or wasn't published till we got off the air yesterday. So guys, hold on to your seats. You're about to enter the police off the cuff zone. And if you like true crime, real crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And we're about to go off the cuff. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch Microbizer.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
You know, yesterday, and we're back, yesterday when Ruby Franke entered that court to plead guilty, of course, for any human being, it would be probably the most unpleasant experience of your life. But in her body language, there seemed to be some anger. Like, who was she angry at? Was she angry at herself? Was she angry at the court? Was she angry at the situation she was put in? But she seemed to me to be a bit unrepentant, if that's possible to predict that from her body language. You see our little thumbnail today. Ruby Franke pleads guilty to 4 charges, seems unrepentant. And I was saying that and am saying that because by her body language, it seemed to me that she was, as I said, very angry. And the statement that was submitted by her attorneys, basically tossing the whole blame onto Jody Hildebrandt. And no doubt Jody Hildebrandt is a monster and deserves a great deal of this blame. But you cannot be persuaded to do the things that were alleged in this case without you having some evil inside you yourself. And the law firm, of course, the Wynwood law firm that's representing Ruby Franke, totally tossed this to and at Jody Hildebrand. And I don't know if that's ever going to be believable because, well, what we saw anyway is that in order to get whatever deal they put together in this plea bargain, to agree to whatever deal they're going to get, Ruby Franke must testify against Jody Hildebrand. And we're going to learn on February 20th. That's the date that Ruby Franke gets sentenced. And for the 4 charges, they carry a sentence of 1 to 15 years. And if you noticed yesterday, the language that was used is those 1 to 15 years are consecutive, means they run one after another, not concurrent, which would indicate at the same time, consecutive. So 1 to 15, four times consecutive. Does that mean she does 1 year for that, the one charge, 1 year for the next charge, 1 year for the third charge, and 1 year for the fourth charge, equaling 4 years? 1 to 15 could mean 15. So that's going to be determined upon the people that levy these charges, the judge that levies these charges, and what the actual sentences, and if there is any leeway in these sentences, i.e. for good behavior. Time served, of course, she's already served 3.5 months. That is usually almost all the time taken off the sentence as time that's already been served. It counts towards all the time that you would receive. I'm going to play yesterday the video of when Ruby Franke walked into the courtroom. And again, she's handcuffed in the front of her body. She's wearing what we would refer to in the criminal justice field as a zebra suit, although the stripes are not black and white. They are white and like a bluish type of thing. Anyway, she walks into the courtroom front cuffed in this little uniform. If that doesn't humble you, but yet within her body language, I didn't read a lot of humbleness. I didn't see a lot of humbleness in her actions. Could that be just that she was super upset? Or was she mad? You judge for yourself. I'm going to play a little. This is from yesterday.
Here in the matter of State of Utah versus Franke, case number 231501764. Mr. Winward is here representing Ms. Franke. Let's bring her out. And Mr. Clark and Mr. Sham are here representing the State of Utah. Ms. Franke is now here. Mr. Winward, we are scheduled for a waiver hearing. Is there going to be a waiver today?
There will, plus a plea agreement, Your Honor.
All right.
I'll ask the bailiff to hand you if it's been executed.
So plus a plea agreement, a waiver hearing, but plus a plea agreement. Now you see Ruby Franke walk into the courtroom, and of course, anyone that walks into a courtroom and they're the subject of the charges is not going to look all that happy.
Executed.
All right. Mr. Winward, you have discussed with Ms. Franke a preliminary hearing, what's involved in a preliminary hearing. She understands she has a right to a preliminary hearing on all of the charges in the case. She understands what the charges are, and she's prepared to waive a preliminary hearing in the case on all charges.
She is, and that is contained in this agreement on page 7 as well.
Very good. All right. I've been handed a plea agreement, and it appears to be signed by Ms. Franke. Ms. Franke, did you sign this agreement?
Yes,
And you did that today? When did you sign it?
on the 18th,
Okay. You've read it carefully?
every word.
Your signature represents to the court that you've read it carefully, that you understand what you've read, and that you agree to all of the terms. Is that all accurate?
Yes,
You've had sufficient time to ask questions of your counsel, to go over any questions you have, you're ready to go forward.
Yes,
You don't need any more time.
I'm ready.
Ms. Franke, is anyone pressuring you to enter into this agreement?
No,
Anyone promising you anything I haven't been told about?
no,
Anything that's not in the written plea agreement?
no,
Are you under the influence of alcohol or drugs today?
no,
Is there anything today that could in any way interfere with your ability to understand the agreement, its consequences, anything?
no,
No physical condition, no medication, nothing?
no.
Any further record, counsel?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Windward, we ready to proceed?
We are ready to proceed.
All right, then. Ms. Franke, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 3, aggravated child abuse?
You know, when you see that when she makes the guilty plea, you know, she puts her head down and she closes her eyes. That's a hell of a thing to admit to, you know. And when we spoke about yesterday, the allocution, an allocution is much deeper than that, where you have to go into detail about your intent and why you did it. Here, she's just pleading guilty to it. A little bit easier, but nonetheless not easy at all.
A second-degree felony.
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
Guilty.
And to count 6, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
You know, in a hearing like this, I don't know if that's the time to show how sorrowful you are, because the sentencing is going to be on the 20th. That's when she should probably say how sorry she is and regretful she is. But this is a hearing where they're taking the plea from her.
There is a factual basis set forth in the agreement that is a stipulated factual basis, counsel.
That's correct, Your Honor. That is correct, Judge Walton.
The court finds that the factual basis is sufficient. All of the terms of the agreement are stipulated, including that the court obtained pre-sentence investigation report, correct?
Correct.
There won't be any argument about whether prison is the appropriate sentence, and there's an agreement about the 4 counts running consecutive.
That is correct.
All right, the court finds then that Ms. Franke's pleas are made knowingly and voluntarily. The court therefore accepts and enters those pleas. The court orders the preparation of a pre-sentence investigation report to be prepared by AP&P and the Department of Corrections. Counsel, what about sentencing on February 20th? I think, do you and your client agree to waive time, counsel?
We do agree to waive time, Your Honor.
February 20th, I believe, is a Tuesday. Is that right? Tw 10 a.m.?
That works for us, Your Honor.
All right. Anything else for today?
Your Honor, maybe, I've heard the court say this several times in a different fashion. We are not binding the court to any specific sentence, and the court retains its right to sentence as it sees fit. I just mentioned that this is not a Rule 11 plea, but although it's a stipulated statement of defendant.
Counsel, approach, please.
You know, I think what he was asking there is that that this doesn't lock into a certain sentence, that the court still has leeway. And this is my interpretation of this leeway to reduce the sentence, well, not beyond 1 year as the very least on each charge, but that the court has the power and the leeway to give a lighter or even more, well, it can't give a more, a larger sentence than 1 to 15, but it certainly can give 1 on each charge. So that's what I think that this attorney is approaching the bench about right now. And there's silence in the courtroom because obviously the attorneys are speaking to the judge. They call that a sidebar. And you older people like me that were around for the O.J. Simpson case, it seems half the trial was attorneys having sidebars with Judge Ito during that case. And so that the judge said in this case to
All right, anything else for today?
approach the bench. Well, they're back now from the sidebar.
Nothing from the state. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. We are in recess.
Thanks, Your Honor.
So that was yesterday, and that was Ruby Franke pleading guilty to 4 of the charges. And as we said, the sentences were, or are, not were, are 1 to 15 years, 4 guilty pleas. So 4 sentences of 1 to 15 years to run consecutively, not concurrently, to run consecutively. So that's what we're going to see on February 20th. And we're not going to see Ruby Franke walk out of that courtroom a free woman. She's going to remain in handcuffs, and she's going to be taken charge by the Department of Corrections, and she's going to prison. The other night, I gave a little lesson. Right now, she's in jail. Jail, for those that don't know, is it's almost like a holding pattern. However, you can spend time in a jail less than a year. Once you are convicted of a felony, you go to prison. That's more than a year. That's the very definition of a felony or a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor is a crime that the sentence can be up to 1 year, but less than a year. A felony is that you are eligible for a sentence of more than 1 year and to be served in a prison. So that is where Ruby Franke will go when she pleads guilty on February 20th. She's not going to walk out of that courtroom a free woman. And many of you guys, we all understand the severity of this. And I'm going to play a little bit of what the Wynwood law firm said, and then what the charges were, and some of the written allocution, not standing up there and say, yes, I did this, and that, and I intended to cause this and that. She didn't have to do that, but she did do it written. So an allocution sworn in a sworn statement. And that all came out later yesterday once we went off the air, because some people said, oh, why didn't you say? Because it wasn't out yet. It had not been out yet. This is from Law and Crime. And this is some of the statement from the Wynwood law firm, which we spoke about yesterday, because it seemed like the Wynwood law firm was totally pushing the blame for 90% of this onto Jody Hildebrand. And you could see it on the screen, and I'll play a little bit of this.
Took advantage of this quest and twisted it into something heinous. Over an extended period, this Hildebrand systematically isolated Ruby Franke from her extended family, older children, and her husband, Kevin Franke. This prolonged isolation resulted in Miss Franke being subjected to a distorted sense of morality, shaped by Miss Hildebrand's influence. So really putting the blame, in a way, on Jody. Very, very interesting. Now, with all that in mind, let's get into what happened. Ruby Franke officially pled guilty in the 5th District Court in Washington County, Utah, in front of Judge John J. Walton. She pled guilty to 4 of the 6 charges, 4 counts of aggravated child abuse, each one a second-degree felony.
Ms. Franke, how do you plead to count 1, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 3, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony?
Guilty.
To count 5, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
Guilty.
And to count 6, aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony.
With my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children, guilty.
Now, 2 of the charges were dropped. Counts 2 and 4 in the
We know that. Now we got to
Okay,
see
so it
what she
starts.
did.
From approximately May 22nd, 2023 until August 30th, 2023. So now we have a date range, 3 months of this abuse. In Washington County, Utah, the defendant, Ruby Franke, intentionally or knowingly inflicted and allowed another adult to inflict serious physical injuries upon her children that were ages 9, EF, and 11 to 12, RF, as more fully described below. So she didn't just do it herself, but she seemingly allowed Jody to do it too. Now, again, it's important when you look at the ages here, seemingly 9 years old for the daughter, 11 to 12 for the son. Seems to me like this might have happened before and through his own birthday. Let's get into it. Count 1 is the longest. And I warn you right now, this is incredibly difficult to hear. And count 1 is aggravated child abuse of RF, her 11, 12-year-old son. And it's about physical injury that includes physical torture. This is what it says. Count 1. The defendant's actions involve the physical torture of RF. Initially, RF was forced to do physical tasks for hours and days at a time. These included wall sits, carrying boxes full of books up and down stairs, and working outside. Eventually, RF was forced to do outside labor without shoes and in the summer heat. He was forced to stand in the direct sunlight for several days. He was forced to remain outside at all hours of the day and night for extended periods of time. These actions resulted in repeated and serious sunburns with blistered and sloughing skin. RF was denied adequate water for several of the days he was required to remain in the summer heat, and he was punished when he secretly consumed water. He was denied sufficient food, and when given food, he was given very plain meals, example, rice and chicken, while others in the house ate regular and more flavorful meals. He was isolated from other people and denied all forms of entertainment, including books, notebooks, and electronics. In addition, after RF attempted to run away in July, his hands and feet were regularly bound. Binding included being tied to the defendant and to weights. Many times, the binding included using 2 sets of handcuffs, one on RF's wrists and one on his ankles. Again, very consistent with what we've heard so far about his injuries. At times, with RF lying on his stomach, ropes were used to tie the 2 sets of handcuffs together so that his arms and lower legs were lifted off the ground. The bindings resulted in injuries to RF's wrists and ankles, where the handcuffs cut through the skin and damaged the muscle tissue. These injuries were treated with homeopathic remedies and covered with duct tape. That's when we heard about the cayenne pepper being used. Then the bindings were placed on top of the duct tape. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, it goes on to say, again, all part of count 1, physical torture. Specific instances of abuse committed by the defendant include 1, kicking RF while wearing boots, 2, holding his head underwater, and 3, cutting off oxygen by placing her hands over his mouth and nose. I tell you right now, I'm not going to lie to you, that is actually worse than what I thought we were dealing with. I didn't know any of that. I don't think any of us really knew any of that. You know, it seems to me one of the reasons the starvation charges were dropped is because it was duplicative of this conduct. You might not have needed that after everything we just heard. And it does make me wonder if that account, everything that we just heard, was not only determined from the physical evidence, the physical examinations of the kids, what the kids ended up saying to law enforcement and medical, understandable. Additionally, the defendant and another adult, presumably Jody, regularly sought to indoctrinate RF and convince him that he was evil and possessed, and that he needed to willingly be obedient to avoid punishments, and that the punishments were necessary to repent. He was also told that everything that was being done to him were acts of love. Yeah.
You know, this is so disturbing, you know. that this young little boy, 11 years old, and his sister, 9 years old, were forced to endure this. And there's no doubt that, of course, the physical evidence, the injuries, led investigators to all of this. But also, this is from the testimony. This is from the testimony of these two young kids about what happened to them. And then witnesses, of course, the testimony of witnesses. And so disturbing. And when you see, you see Ruby Franke, and she doesn't look like a monster, right? She really doesn't. She looks like she's an attractive woman. She looks like a nice person. But nice people don't do what's alleged in this, and not just alleged. She just pled guilty, as we just saw. Let's finish this up with law and crime.
That level of manipulation, that again is so consistent with what we've heard about from alleged victims of Jodi Hildebrandt, including her niece, Jessie, who we interviewed in October.
So she strips you of identity, she strips you of credibility, and she isolates. And so she's saying everything that you say is a lie. Everything that you say is manipulation. You're manipulating everyone around you. You're lying and destroying everyone's life. And she would tell me all the time, if you just confess, I will stop. You confess, I will stop, which is torture.
Again, it's almost verbatim to what this description was about what these kids had to endure. And I said kids because now let's move on to the third count. We talked the actions that also
three.
cause severe emotional harm to EF. Other than binding and the specific instances of abuse RF was subjected to, EF was subjected to the same treatment as her brother. She was isolated and forced to do the physical tasks, remain outside, and denied food and water. She was also repeatedly told she was evil and possessed. The punishments were necessary for her to be obedient and to repent, and these things were being done to her in order to help her. EF was convinced that she was evil and needed to go through these things in order to repent. Can we just understand for a minute what these kids psychologically now have to go through to not accept what happened to them? I mean, that is a clear example of what we've talked about with other victims of abuse, that they think they did something wrong. Think about what these kids went through. Let's go to the fourth count. Again, this is the last count that Ruby Franke pled guilty to. This is actually number 6 in the original information. And this was about abuse of EF that constituted physical injury that includes multiple injuries. Count 4. The defendant's actions caused 2 or more physical injuries to EF. She was forced to work outside in the heat barefoot. She was also forced to run barefoot on dirt roads for an extended period of time. Remember, this was during the summer. EF's feet were repeatedly injured by, and she was repeatedly sunburned. When examined on August 30th, these wounds were apparent by scabs, blisters, and sloughing skin. I don't know if there's even more I have to say here, but so what we have here is repeated physical abuse and injuries, not isolated incidents. They both suffered. They both suffered tremendous.
This is also consistent with what Jodi Hildebrandt's niece had reported. Almost exactly the same things that she had endured. It seems like a course of conduct over a protracted period of time. It seems like her MO, her modus operandi, this is what she does. This is what she teaches. This is what she believes. And she inflicts this on young children. Just horrific. And we're going to go to I believe the last, this is the last charge. And this is part of the plea agreement.
Subjecting myself to serving a mandatory penalty for that crime. I know my sentence may include a prison term, fine, or both. I know that in addition to a 90% surcharge will be imposed, I also know that I may be ordered to make restitution to any victims of my crimes, including any restitution that may be owed on charges that are dismissed as part of a plea agreement. I know that if there is more than one crime involved, the sentences may be imposed one after another consecutively, or they may run at the same time concurrently. So, it is up to the judge to determine what the sentence will be. And theoretically, it could be the maximum of 15 years in prison on each to run consecutively, one after the other. Now, I don't think that's going to happen but in light of what she pled guilty to and what date. So even if it is 1 year in prison, that's a minimum of 4 years in prison. Theoretically, that's what we could. Washington County Attorney's Office agrees to remain neutral regarding future hearings before the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole. So, in other words, she will be a state's witness. She will testify against Jody Hildebrand. In exchange, the prosecution will not seek to keep her in prison at a later parole hearing. That's what we were expecting to hear. That is a very, very big deal because you would want to give Ruby Franke a plea deal. And I imagine that's maybe why they dropped 2 of these counts.
So these are the charges. You read them. Horrific, right? So when you hear this and we listen to this case, I initially thought that with this plea deal that there was a possibility that Ruby Franke would not get prison time. Well, I know now that that's not the case. And now I think based on what I've heard, and again, yesterday we didn't have, when we went live, we didn't have this information from the allocution, which was actually taken down as a sworn statement, but just outrageous. So now, I mean, what would be a fair sentence? How much time should you get? I think maybe a fair sentence would be hard to say, you know. I think she should do at least 5 years at state prison. If you guys think that 5 years in state prison is fair in this case, and that's in exchange for her testimony against Jody Hildebrand. If you think 5 years in state prison in exchange for her testimony and 4 guilty pleas is a fair sentence, put 1. If you think that that sentence of 5 years in state prison in return for testifying against Jody Hildebrand is too lenient, put 2 in the chat. I just like to get a gauge on what you guys think in regards to the treatment she's receiving here. Are they being too lenient to her? As the behind the scenes negotiating with the prosecutor, and don't forget that a lot of the behind the scenes negotiating is because they don't want to put the kids through the trial. They don't want these poor kids who've been through so much to have to testify at a trial. So that would be sort of sparing them, you know. That would be sparing them from being traumatized again. They've already been traumatized. They already suffered this. Linda J., I watched this yesterday and her parents and sisters are there. Well, it's still their sister, no matter what she did. It's, I guess, still your sister. And Roseanne, wow, that's a harsh sentence. I believe she should get the 60 years and no lunch on Christmas. Turnabout is fair play. Wow. That's a pretty, but then Roseanne, there would have been no plea agreement. There was a plea bargain to get her to testify against Jody Hildebrand, who I think most of us would agree. I don't know, maybe she's just as bad as, because she allowed this to be done. She's just as bad. Kaz Z, following this case from the UK, it breaks my heart what these children have gone through. She definitely needs punishment for what she has done to them. Kaz Z, no doubt, you're 100% correct. Heather, whatever. So the judge discussing prison as appropriate was his suggestion. Yes, I think that ultimately the prison term is negotiated by in a plea bargain, is negotiated by the prosecution, the defense, and ultimately, I believe the judge has the final decision. But the judge will listen to the prosecution, and the judge will listen to the defense, and then the judge will make a decision. And they mentioned something about the Utah Board of Sentencing and Pardons, and they absolutely will have something to do with this. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right location. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. If you want to contribute to us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with, count them, 5 different levels, and we appreciate all our subscribers, our fans, our friends, who we've become closer and closer to over the years, from sharing all these episodes of these different cases in the true crime genre. And I didn't see any of you guys put numbers in there. Some of you guys suggested a certain sentence. So if you think 5 years in state prison is a fair sentence, put a 1 in the chat. If you think it's too lenient, put a 2 in the chat. I'm just interested to see what most of you are thinking about in regards to Ruby Franke. Karen Cole, how are you, Karen? Good to see you. Legal Minded Friends. She has a great podcast. You guys got to join Karen Cole on her podcast. She's another attorney. The world's filled with attorneys. YouTube is filled with attorneys too, you know, so lots of them. I'm going to play a little bit of this from Court TV, and to see some of the other people who have been affected by this case, and of course, Jody Hildebrandt.
Franke believed that Jody Hildebrandt had the insight to offer a path to continual improvement. Ms. Hildebrandt took advantage of this quest and twisted it into something heinous, the statement reads. Might not be that far-fetched. Adam Steed was on this program and described what happened to him when he was being counseled by Jody Hildebrandt.
Jody lured us in, treating us kind and fun, and then she came out with these radical ideas. She used the peer pressure of entire groups and all parties involved to destroy your soul, to try to convince you that crazy wrong ideas were correct. And then just suddenly, before you realized it, it was like being a fish and biting a hook. She had you in so deep that you were, you were fighting for your life to try to get away from her, and all parties, the safety of all parties involved, and there was nothing you could do but get your life destroyed.
So I think one of the questions, again, in this case involving the abuse of Ruby's children is, how much of this was Jody, or was it a continuation of Ruby's own behavior? Let's take a look at a timeline so we get a little bit of perspective.
You know, that is a great point that Vinnie Politan just raised. Let's not be so naive. Ruby Franke had a podcast, 8 Passengers, that went back to 2015. And in 2022, she lost the podcast because of allegations of abuse. There was at least 10 or more allegations of abuse. So at that point, she wasn't involved with Jody Hildebrandt. So it goes back to then. It goes back to those years. So how does this Wynwood law firm reconcile themselves by blaming all of this on Jody Hildebrandt when it goes back? It goes back to 2015. And let's also recall that that they had 2 million or more subscribers. So the 8 Passengers podcast had anywhere from 2 million to 2.5 million subscribers. So the whole world was watching this. And that in itself was a form of abuse. Did the kids really want to have their lives recorded for the whole world to see? Who would want that? Who would want their whole life recorded for the whole world to see? So for the Wynwood law firm to suggest that this was all Jody Hildebrandt is, it's not true. It's absolutely not true.
Shut down. Ruby and Jody start working together on self-improvement program called Connections. In August, Ruby and Kevin separate. Kevin moves out of the house, In September, their oldest daughter, Shari, requests a welfare check and tells police she's concerned that her sisters and brothers are being left home alone for long periods and wanted to make sure they had enough food. Imagine not being concerned whether or not your siblings are getting fed. 2023, Ruby and the kids then move into Jody's home in Utah. August 30th, Hildebrandt's neighbor calls 911 when one of Ruby's children escapes from the house, the hero of this story, and has wounds and bindings. Ruby and Jody are arrested, charged with child abuse. September 1st, Kevin alleged his eldest daughter, Shari, had broken into the family's home. November 29th, Kevin files for divorce.
You know, there's another thing that I have a very, and anyone that listens to this show knows I have a rather big problem with this. Kevin Franke, how is he skating out of this with nothing? Not charged with anything, not brought into this case in any way. How could they think that? He was the co-host of that podcast for 7 years. How is he walking away free? And the other part of that is, how is he being given custody of these children? Was that properly vetted? And I know in Utah, they have the Department of Children and Family Services. That is the equivalent of New York's Bureau of Child Welfare. They changed the acronym for that every year, it seems. But in Utah, it's Department of Children and Family Services. Did they vet Kevin Franke well enough that they're okay with him getting custody of the children? I guess so, because that's what it looks like is going to happen. Why wasn't he in the courtroom when Ruby Franke was taking the plea? Was that on the advice of counsel? Or is that because he filed for divorce? And we also question whether or not the filing of divorce is because of civil matters, concerned with being sued, concerned with being parted from a lot of the money they made during that 7 years of 2 million subscribers.
That's where we are. So who's to blame? And how much of this is Ruby continuing this behavior, or is the host of the Mormon Stories podcast, John Delin, and also joining us in Orlando, Florida, psychotherapist and CEO of Life.
I've listened to this host of the Mormon podcast, and he's excellent. And obviously, he knows a lot about what's occurring on the ground there.
Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacey. I'm looking at this situation here, and there's a few things at work here. Dr. Janie Lacey, is it possible for a parent to not be the one mostly responsible or almost entirely responsible for the abuse of their own child when they have care, custody, and control?
Well, there's no doubt that the parents are ultimately responsible, but we can look at situations where the closest people to them who have repetitive access and download of certain messages can create a distorted reality and can create certain levels of distorted belief that are not based in healthy attachment and secure attachment in these family systems that can potentially influence how they were parenting or how she was parenting and how she related to her children, and seeing them, as we were hearing, through religious or cult-like belief systems that they were evil and treating them as such. So is it possible that there was a strong influence, especially if there was repetitive download and access to her? Absolutely. But ultimately, the parents are responsible for the well-being of their children and what has happened in this case. But in cults, 100%, we know that the influence is there, and distorted reality can influence someone's bad behavior.
You know, here you're hearing the word cult. When I bring that up sometimes in the chat, there's people that, what do you mean? Don't blame the church. Don't blame. Look, here's people that boots on the ground here in Utah. And they're bringing up the religious aspect of this. And I think that's there. That's part of this. Absolutely.
John Delin, how would you compare how Ruby was treating her children, before she met Jody versus after? Because there still was criticism for the way she was doing it very openly, very publicly on YouTube.
Yeah, I think definitely Jody Hildebrandt is known for severe measures, both to keep a husband in line and to keep children in line. But I just want to open up the assignment of responsibility to one other group. There's some core teachings of Mormon doctrine or theology. The idea that sexual sin is next to murder in severity, that evil spirits exist to penetrate our brains and to tempt us to get sexual sin, to commit sexual sin. If those two teachings didn't exist, Jody Hildebrandt would not have been able to put her meat hooks into Adam Paul Steed and his wife, into Ruby and Kevin. It starts there. It starts with a Mormon couple going to their bishop saying, I caught my husband or my kids doing this or that, and I need help. And then the Mormon bishop says, Jody Hildebrandt will solve your problems for you. And so that's a third, in my view, that's at least a third of the responsibility, is toxic Mormon doctrine and theology, and you could say Christian or just religious, around sexual purity and the severity of sexual sin. Then of course, there's Ruby and Kevin's responsibility. And then a third, at least, is Jody Hildebrandt, sort of fomenting cult leader-like influence over Ruby and Kevin in a way that has wreaked havoc in not just two families, but in hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of families all along Utah.
So Dr. J.
Wow. And he explained that so much better than I could, because I'm not there. I'm not totally familiar with Mormon doctrine and the whole psychosexual thing and this craziness to root it out, that you're evil if you do this. If you masturbate, you're evil. You should be excommunicated from the church. All of that stuff is really crazy. And then we heard right there that the Mormon church, or the elders, were referring clients to Jody Hildebrandt. So there's blame there. Civil suit. Anyone hearing civil suit after these criminal charges are done with? There's at least 3 entities, maybe 4. Jody Hildebrandt, Ruby Franke, the Mormon church, and Kevin Franke. 4 plaintiffs in a civil suit after the criminal charges are disposed of. So that's what they were speaking about. So,
J.D. Lacey, what's in it potentially for someone like Jody Hildebrandt to be inserted into someone's family, to break it apart, to allegedly abuse the children? What's the end game in all of that for her? Is there something psychologically? Could she be motivated just by money, power?
Usually in these cases, my assumption would be that there's some power and control that feeds her, especially when there's some delusional tactics that are creating people's behavior and there's a following. And I believe 100% what my
sorry, guys, it's
panelist has mentioned, right? So someone's belief system and what they're being indoctrinated in, their spirituality, and we can just pick the colors of the ice cream, that's going to dictate how they see family, that's going to dictate how they see life. And if Jody knew this, and whatever her own levels of potential relationships and trauma or beliefs or whatever has created this position where she probably was also delusional in the sense, this depending on where she was in her own toxic faith walk. But the power and control and being able to manipulate people, especially under toxic faith situations, is probably more common than we realize, but they don't always result in abuse situations like this case has.
John, what about Jody Hildebrandt's own life? Like marriage, children, what's her backstory? And how did she get to where she was?
We know that Jody, growing up, didn't fit the mold of the modern Mormon gender stereotype for a young woman. She was more masculine, more athletic. She did get married as a young Mormon woman should. Her marriage didn't last more than 2 years, as I understand it. And I think it's pretty clear that just women generally within patriarchal kind of high demand religions tend to feel disempowered and devalued. And so as Jody Hildebrandt became a mental health professional and started developing solutions for couples and solutions, even though her own marriage had failed, fixes for marriages and solutions for parenting, even though she, as I understand it, struggled as a parent herself. This accumulation of power as a therapist that could fix some of these very severe problems facing so many Mormon families became a real source of power for her. There are questions about whether possibly Jody and Ruby were, there was some romantic interest, at least on one side or the other. There's definite indication that Jody Hildebrandt's never been very fond of men and almost gets a satisfaction out of kind of torturing and punishing men. And then the only other thing I'll add to what's already been said about Jody is that in addition to money and power and possibly sex, there's good indication that she literally believed that sexual sin is next to murder.
Wow.
In severity, because that's the doctrinal teachings of the Mormon church that she's a member of. So if she's resorts.
So there you hear it. And I mean, I think this guy's great because he has that podcast in regards to the Mormon religion, Mormon Chronicles, I believe it's called. And he knows all the inside information, but there's seeing, I don't want to spread rumors, but that's not the first time I heard that Ruby and Jody may have been lovers. And again, talk about if that's true, that's 100% against the teachings of the Mormon church. But does it make sense that Kevin Franke was kicked out of the house 14 months ago, right? And is that what's insulating him from this case? Is that what's insulating him from any potential charges, that he was kicked out of the house, out of the relationship, if you will? And is that why he's filed a divorce against his wife? But how many husbands out there would allow what happened to Kevin Franke to happen to them? That this domineering woman named Jody Hildebrandt came between him and his wife and kicked him out of his own house? I think not. I think she would have been out, but that's where there's, we talk about the elephant in the room. And obviously from the gentleman speaking from the Mormon podcast, that the teachings and the mental health counseling and the fact that Mormon elders were referring clients to Jody Hildebrandt, that is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And, when we look at, again, the thumbnail, Ruby Franke pleads guilty to 4 charges, seems unrepentant. I mean, to me, when I watched her in the courtroom, she did seem unrepentant. And there's, of course, her husband, Kevin, right next to her. And I get a good laugh every time I see that. It's not funny. Jody Hildebrandt, MS, create joy in your life and relationships. Wow. I don't think she created much joy. I think she created lots of misery, And again, when you look at a photograph of Ruby Franke, she's an attractive woman. She seems happy. She seems upbeat, but behind the scenes, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And when you see a picture of Jody and Ruby together, something clicks, something doesn't seem right there, And Kevin Franke, again, I could beat a dead horse and say, why is he not being charged? All these things going on, him filing a divorce against his wife, Ruby Franke, the fact that he lost his professorship at at Brigham Young University. Again, the Mormon Church controls Brigham Young, doesn't it? So is that all that unusual? I don't know. I don't know, because they do control that. And it seems that he was being targeted in some way by the church. But it seems like he's getting very good legal advice, because they haven't laid a glove on him yet. I'm going to show a little bit of Ruby Franke's daughter and some of the statements she's made in regards. This was the eldest daughter.
Right. Okay, so let's get into this Instagram post. So Sherry writes, and I'm going to read two parts of it, but this is the first part. Quote, "There's literally not even words to describe how upside down my life has become. I've cried, had an infinite number of panic attacks, had way too much ice cream, and yet life goes on. Therapy has literally saved me, but God has too. My life is somehow becoming more beautiful and fulfilling despite all the terrible things going on. I've tried to live my life to the fullest the last few weeks, even though all I want to do is hide away in my apartment. I do have my days." Brian, let's start right there. What's your reaction to that part of the statement from Sherry Franke?
Well, she's human, right? I mean, she's obviously going through a really difficult time. So many people have reached out to her, whether she wants to hear from them or not. I think this is one of those things. It's about time we're hearing from her, right? There's so many people that are involved in this as just a consumer or even a family member that just want to know how she's doing. It's pretty obvious that both Sherry and Chad have perspective on what was going on to some degree, right? Just how much they want to share is totally up to them as it pertains to their mom, Ruby, and even if Kevin had any involvement in any of this, right? I think that's still the question mark here. But when it comes to
that's where I have to when these journalists, these broadcasters, they ask a question like, "Did Kevin?" That's not very smart. Of course, he had an involvement in this. He was her co-host in the podcast for 7 years. How could you even ask that question? How does he walk away, skates away scot-free? Because he got away 14 months ago before this really came to light. But before that, there were 10 allegations in regards to their show, in regards to abuse. So how does he walk away from this? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
what she said, she's a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That is very forward-facing on her Instagram page. But I'm not surprised that she's had kind of this tug of war with how she's feeling. But it's good to hear she's doing okay, considering her family is in the spotlight, not the spotlight any of them probably wanted.
And we have to remember that when the news broke of her mom's arrest, the first thing she did was she posted on her Instagram story a photo of the police, and it wrote, "Finally." And I thought that was a very, very big statement. So it's not like this is the first thing she's posted since the arrest. It was the "finally" that was the first post. Was there anything else in between? Because that was a very big development and a very big statement for her to make that after her mom's arrest.
No, haven't seen anything. And it's been what, 6 going on 7 weeks? I mean, this is really over the last month or so kind of just dragged out a little bit because we haven't had court hearings. We haven't had a lot of this
way
process
before the
to
hearings
understand.
yesterday.
Family and myself. And again, she wrote, "Words can't express the gratitude I feel for you all, and I feel your love." Now, we should note that this post was made a few days ago. What is she talking about here in regards to the court day?
Yeah, she's talking about the day where you ultimately saw in some of our video play out where Kevin, which is Sherry's father, Chad, who's Sherry's brother, and then their 2 attorneys all walked down the steps. They went into a courthouse in Provo, Utah, to the 4th District Court here in Utah County. And it's about the child welfare situation as it pertains to the 4 remaining passengers, right? So we'll refer to it that way. Mom and dad are 1 and 2. Sherry and Chad are your 2 eldest.
This is earlier on when it was still in the process of going to court. But the other thing is that Kevin Franke very recently tried to have his daughter arrested for going into the house and getting belongings that belonged to some of the children. He had to, in his words, tried to have a charge with robbery.
Story broke and all the reporting indicated that there was this kind of acrimonious relationship between Sherry and Kevin. You said it, that at one point there's this video that comes out where Kevin was wondering why Sherry wasn't arrested. He thought that she stole these various items from the Franke home. She ended up returning the items like tablets, cell phones, cameras, journals, passports. Police at the time said to Kevin she had no intent to steal. She was holding on to these items possibly for safekeeping. He hadn't been living at that residence for 13 months, so this wasn't a crime. And so now when she writes this post that says, there's been basically signifying a lot that she's gone through, and then the next day she is walking with Kevin Franke, and we know from Kevin Franke's attorney, Randy Kester, that there seems to be some kind of reconciliation. That's what that signifies to me, is that post to me signifies there is some sort of reconciliation between Kevin and Sherry. That's what I'm reading between them.
So, that was, we would call that job on the NYPD, we used to call that a closed job. You would go to your home and try to remove clothing. In this case, she was getting items that belonged to her siblings. And Kevin Franke tried to have her arrested. First of all, there was no intent. And you can't really get arrested when you're with the police who are breaking into your house to get items. There's no crime there. But that was a little bit suspect to me as to why, how is he still antagonistic toward his daughter? Folks, if you're looking for a great attorney in the New York metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer and a fantastic defense attorney. You can reach Joe on his cell phone at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com or go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Not only is Joe a fantastic attorney, but he's also a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. In fact, when we first started out, Joe was a frequent guest, but because of this commercial, he's so busy. He doesn't have time to come on the podcast anymore. I don't know if that's true or not, if it's because of the commercial or it's because he's such a good attorney that Nan B, why, by Kevin saying, why is this not a burglary? He actually said, Nan B, why is this not a robbery? Which is totally the wrong vernacular. A robbery is the forcible stealing of property. A burglary is knowingly and unlawfully enter or remaining in a building with intent to commit a crime. So neither one of them apply to this, but he actually on the scene said, why is she not arrested for robbery? Because it's not even remotely a robbery, which again is the forcible stealing of property. So February 20th will be when Ruby Franke will be officially sentenced. And she's eligible for 4 counts she pled guilty to. She could get 1 to 15 years for each of the counts. And that is to run consecutively. So when I asked you guys what you felt would be was 5 years in state prison a fair sentence, most of you thought that was way too lenient. I think there was 1 or 2 of you who thought that was, and most of you think that they should throw the book at her, even with her cooperation and even with her testimony against Jody Hildebrandt. So many of you, and as I said, most of you think that she should get, and I'm not going to ask how much, but she should get a much more severe sentence than 5 years in a state prison. And don't forget, the judge could say, count 1, 2 to 15. I'm going to give you 2 to 15 because that's the parameters, 1 to 15. And she could, but there's also room for the defense to jump in there and negotiate after the testimony and go to the judge after the testimony against Jody Hildebrandt. Is Jody much worse in this case? Is she the real bad party in this? Or is Ruby Franke just as bad? From what you guys say, what I see in the chat, Jeanette Lawson, woof, there's a heavy duty one. And I don't disagree with you, Jeanette. 20 years. Jeanette, I think that is unlikely because even though this is a horrific crime, she's never been arrested before. She's a mom. She's lived well, you can't say now an exemplary life, but she's never been in trouble before. Let's put it that way. Nan B, 6 years out and 3 on good behavior with Ruby. Wow. Yeah, I mean, Akita lover, 15 years for each count. That would be 60 years. That would be 60 years to be served. Well, the 4 counts are to run consecutive. So 1 to 15, 4 times, right? If she did 15 on each, that would be a 60-year sentence. That's a hell of a lot. I don't think people get that for murder these days, you know. Melissa Stiller, and I love now that I know your full name, I'll call you Melissa. No less than 12, that's 3 years per count. Okay, I think that seems fair. Jacqueline Johnston, good to see you. Manifest it. Happy holidays. Absolutely. To all you guys, happy holidays. The best of the seasons, right? The best of feeling the warmth of Christmas and New Year's and Hanukkah and being around friends and family. And that's what we wish the best for everybody. Sarah Keach, where would Ruby even go if she gets out of prison? You know, that's down the road. So that's a good question, though. But chances are she has money, you know. She has money. And B, will there be more charges applied to Jody from Ruby that Jody did to Ruby mentally? Well, I think that was part of Ruby's defense, is that she was brainwashed by Jody Hildebrand. And whether the court buys that or not and gives her a more lenient sentence because of that, what we saw today and what we watched yesterday was that she pled guilty. Marianne Knapp, Ruby, Jody, and Kevin should all get 20 plus each. They were all in this together. Wow. Marianne, I somewhat agree. I don't see how Kevin Franke is walking free. Catherine Plaster, 2 years times 4 counts. Okay. So it would be like 8 years. I can do math. I can do very low level math because I was a cop. Lou Lemorocco. Lou, so good to see you, buddy. Thank you so much for the $20 super sticker. Happy holidays to you. And Lou used to watch me do Coffee with Cannon. By the way, guys, I may bring back the Coffee with Cannon show in 2024. I miss doing it. And I got to figure it out a little bit. But I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the interaction that I had with the audience. If you guys are new to the show, I used to do a show called Coffee with Cannon. We'd talk about current cases and we would talk to each other. It was more interactive, and I would do it using my phone and a gimbal. And we had a lot of fun, and I would shoot a lot when I was down in Florida. There was some beautiful scenery I had behind me, and Lou Lemorocco was a big part of that show. Lou, thank you so much, and happy holidays to you also. So yeah, in 2024, I may bring back Coffee with Cannon. Helen, the Scottish Llama, and under Utah law, you can't do more than 30. Okay. Nan B, I think we addressed that. Can Ruby charge Jody? I think that's going to be part of her. Nan B, what can be charged is many people who were clients of Jody Hildebrand can sue her civilly because, look, she's going to be convicted in a court of law, and that opens the floodgates for civil suits based on what they're going to find out in this case. So absolutely. Allison Crocker, 15 to 20, give the kids a chance to heal and move on. Wow. AS, can any charges be brought against Kevin? Absolutely. I don't know why they haven't yet. And that's a distinct possibility. Lieutenant Pete Pranzo, great to see you, Lieutenant Pete. Always the best. Harlem Raiders, Lieutenant Pete and his wife, Richella, two of our biggest supporters going back to the history of Police Off the Cuff. Well, the history is only 4 years old, but you know, out of the 4 years that I've been doing this show, probably we were only really on YouTube for 2.5 years of it because we were doing it on the wrong sites, and it set us back a little bit. But hey, live and learn. Karen Cole, Merry Christmas, everyone. Ban Ruby, Amy M. Ban Ruby from being near the kids. I think that's probably going to happen. So I'm just reading some of the people in the chat. Thank you, Lou, very much so. Hazel Croft. It's hard to know what would be best for the youngest children. Read their mom. Yeah, that's it's a horrible thing, you know. Sarah Keach. I was ready to say Stacy Keach, the great actor. More than anything, I hope the kids have a good holiday. They must hear about this case on TV and magazines and grocery stores. I couldn't imagine the situation they are going through. Sarah, you are 100% right. Jeanette Lawson, 29 years, 260 days. Wow, that's a lenient sentence. AS, so is Kevin claiming he was brainwashed by Ruby? That's why he didn't check on his kids for 18 months? I don't know what he's claiming. He seems like he has a very good attorney that has kept him out of the mix. There's one fan that wants me to bring back Coffee with Cannon, Jacqueline Johnson. Well, thank you. And yeah, we used to, Lou Lemaraki used to call it Coffee Cuffs and Candid Cannon. I like that, the morning show. Yeah, and I miss doing it. You know, some guys, my friends said, oh, you don't do that show anymore. It's like, all right, maybe you're right. But, you know, something, one of the biggest reasons I like to do the show is because I like to do it. And I really enjoy doing that show. So, you know, something, I think I'm going to give it another shot in 2024 to take a shot at it. Marianne Knapp, 20 plus for all three. Okay. Keith Casaggio, would you check on your kids if they wanted to stay with the crazy alien? 100%, Keith. That's why I don't understand Kevin's conduct. Lawson Mom, I love the AM coffee show, especially while you were in Florida. Well, I'm going back to Florida very soon. But you know something? When I left Florida, I came here on the 13th. The weather in Florida was terrible too. And I get here, it's cold, and then they brought the monsoon down here. But we're going back soon. Sarah Keach says she gets called Stacy Keach all the time. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, right? People mistake your name for that, but that's pretty cool. So, guys, that's my coverage on this today. And I thought that I had to come back on, even though I covered a lot of this stuff yesterday, because myself and Professor Mike Geary, we spoke about, you know, I was thinking I was only going to do like 45 minutes today. I could bang it out in 40 minutes. We'll go an hour and 12 minutes already. We spoke about the allocution, and they never had really addressed that yesterday. And after I went off the air yesterday, then they addressed it. So I said, you know, something, I think I better address it today. And that's what I did. Dragonfly Lady, I love Coffee with Cannon. Great. Jacqueline, bitching with Bill. Yeah, that's what that show could become, you know, as I started complaining about everything. Karen Kennedy, Ruby is narcissistic. It's all about her and not her kids. That was obvious from her show that she had. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for your input. Luna Lady, as an imaginary friend, I did enjoy Coffee with Cannon, especially lighter subjects, a little song music. So looking forward to Florida by proxy. Guys, that's about it. That's about all I have today. But thank you so much for tuning in. I think we had a little bit of fun. We got to interact a little bit. I'll probably come on again very soon, but I want everyone to have a wonderful holiday. Be safe out there. And, you know, this is a season of giving. Try to give a little bit to people that have less than you. And even if it's a hug, a handshake, you know, a kiss on the cheek to someone that's less fortunate than you. Have a great day, everyone, and God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.